Hi class, this is Ben Best and I've read the novel Ellen Foster by Kay Gibbons. Just some basic background information about the novel. It's set in the rural South in either the late 70s or the early 80s. The book was published in 84, but there was also a sequel published many years later that revealed that Ellen lives near Smithfield, North Carolina. At the beginning of the story, Ellen lives with her mother and father. Her mother is constantly sick and often in the hospital due to her heart condition, which is caused by a bout with rheumatic fever that she had as a child. Her husband emotionally abuses her, and it falls to Ellen to comfort her. Ultimately, though, she commits suicide. Ellen's father is an alcoholic and prevents Ellen from saving her mother when she commits suicide. He loses custody of Ellen after making a drunken scene at her school after Ellen runs away, and eventually he dies from a brain aneurysm. After leaving home, Ellen lives in a variety of households before she finally settles into an actual home. First, she lives with her art teacher from school. Then her abusive grandmother despises her. Then she lives with her aunt and her cousin, her Aunt Nadine and cousin Dora, who just sort of regard her with indifference. After being ejected from her aunt's home, she approaches a woman that she met at church who keeps foster children and convinces her to bring her in. Ellen's presenting problem is that she suppresses her emotions. We see examples of this throughout the novel. When Ellen temporarily lives with her free-spirited art teacher, she's genuinely surprised by how freely they express their emotions to one another. She remarks that she didn't know that people could live like that. Ellen's emotional suppression is most pronounced after an encounter with her maternal grandmother. Her grandmother hates Ellen's father. When she tells Ellen that he has died, she slaps Ellen for crying and tells her to let that be the last tear she ever sheds. For the rest of the book, Ellen cannot cry. This lack of emotional release causes her extreme anxiety and distress. Despite the severity of her presenting problem, Ellen is a wellspring of personal strength. She's highly intelligent, which enables her not only to excel in school, but she also manages the household finances after her mother dies. Despite her anxiety, which resulted from repeated emotional abuse, Ellen is highly resilient and finds ways to psychologically adapt to adverse life events, like the death of her mother. She copes with her mother's death by wearing her mother's clothes as a tribute and soothes herself at Christmas by buying her own presents, wrapping them, and accepting them on Christmas morning as if she didn't even know they were there. She's also able to use her resourcefulness and social intelligence to quickly find temporary housing using outside connections, which also could be counted as strengths. The next theory that I connected to Ellen Foster is, of course, systems theory. Specifically, I chose to focus on how two specific elements of systems theory relate to Ellen's story: homeostasis and entropy. So the systems involved in Ellen's life include her family, her school, court system, and Ellen herself. So as Ellen attempts to assert control over her life, gain some agency by finding a happy home and family, her attempts are usually, but not always, thwarted by the court system, which persists in placing her with members of her dysfunctional family in an attempt to maintain homeostasis. And this family is starting to break down through entropy from the time that Ellen's mother dies through the time that Ellen's grandmother dies. However, as Ellen's dysfunctional family falls apart through entropic decay, Ellen learns from its collapse and uses what she learned to form a healthy relationship with her new family. As we know from the text, this is reverse entropy. Excuse me, I mean negative entropy. So the third theory that I connected to Ellen's story is attribution theory, and this one is my favorite. Now, attribution theory is all about what informs our inferences about people, whether we think someone behaves a certain way because of something innate about the individual, or if we think they behave that way due to factors beyond their control. This can help us understand why Ellen's family fails to see the virtue in her behaviors. There's this darkly funny part in the book right after Ellen's grandmother dies, when Ellen decides to decorate the deathbed with all the plastic flowers in the house, as if to trick God into letting her grandmother into heaven. Knowing Ellen's circumstances and the trauma she must have experienced in witnessing her mother's death, it's truly a beautiful moment. But when her aunt shows up, she doesn't see the beauty because she doesn't know this context and she can't relate to it. She just sees the work of a demented mind because they know that, Ellen's father is an alcoholic and they were poor and, lived in squalor. And so they had just assumed that Ellen must be somehow negatively impacted by that and that this affected her psychology. But it was really done in earnest respect for the deceased. So for my literature, I found 5 different peer-reviewed articles that helped inform my views on Ellen's plight. The first, by Schultz, is about the protective factors or strengths that could help someone like Ellen later in life, someone who has suffered from child abuse or neglect. Adaptive functioning skills are skills that help someone bounce back from adverse life events and adapt to the new situations that develop as a result of those events, such as when Ellen's father attempts to sexually assault her, and Ellen responds by immediately sorting out a new living arrangement that shows, extreme adaptive functioning skills. The articles I've listed here by Woodside, McCloskey, and Kuramoto are all about how Ellen's parents could negatively impact her in the long term. Her father was an alcoholic, and that puts her at risk for multiple mental health disorders and substance abuse disorders. Witnessing her father abusing her mother statistically increases the likelihood that she herself will be the victim of domestic abuse. And witnessing her mother's suicide puts her at risk for suicide. But she may be able to overcome these mental health risks if she can overcome her emotional suppression and anxiety. If she can learn to express her emotions in a healthy way, this may lessen the distress that she feels. And I'd be very interested to learn if Gibbons addresses this in any way in the sequel. As I said earlier, the novel takes place in rural North Carolina. Though I'm not addressing anything else about it, the sequel mentions that she lives near Smithfield, which isn't far from where I grew up, so I can tell you some things about Ellen's culture from experience. Black Southerners have historically been the victims of discrimination in the South. Race, more than anything else, is the most dominant determinant of social class. From the beginning of the novel, it's established that Ellen's best friend is a young African-American girl named Starletta. Ellen loves Starletta, but struggles with this affection and her racist beliefs throughout the narrative. She has trouble resolving the two of them. It's the resolution of this struggle that helps her to grow as a person, because in the end she learns about her own privilege despite the hardships she's endured. And it's this struggle that helped to strengthen her capacity for empathy and to keep her connected to her humanity.